James, how much faith are you putting in polls that show Harris is ahead in key states and nationwide?
So let me say this. August is a great Democratic month. We hell on wheels come August, okay? You remember what George Steinbrenner said about Dave Winfield? He called him Mr. May. The idea is to be good in November. And I tell Democrats some caution here. First of all, most quants say we have to win by 3 in the popular vote to win the Electoral College. So when you see a poll that says we 2 up, well, that's actually you're 1 down if the poll is correct.
Yeah, you lose.
The other thing is Trump traditionally, when he's on the ballot, chronically underpolls, all right? And so they came back late in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in 2020, and it showed Biden winning these states 7, 8
Underpolls
points.
meaning Trump's going to do better than the polling shows?
I'm saying
because
traditionally, he underpolls. Traditionally.
Means he's going to do better in the election because people are too ashamed to tell a pollster they're going to vote for him.
I don't know,
Right.
but I'm just saying traditionally with Trump on the ballot, just telling the Democrats, they said, oh, James and Debbie Downer, what's he talking about? Well, I'm not just telling you, you got to win by 3. And I think we can get there. I think the debate on September 10th is going to be so consequential, and it's going to have an audience that we can't believe, because what does America love? A train wreck.
Democratic strategist James Carville with that word of caution for Democrats on Friday. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance was pressed on the issue of abortion and whether Donald Trump would veto a federal ban if he wins a second term. We'll play for you what the senator had to say about that. We're also following the former president seeming to be rethinking that September 10th debate with Vice President Kamala Harris. We'll show you what he posted on social media. And we'll bring you the latest out of the Middle East after Israel and Hezbollah exchanged strikes over the weekend. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It's Monday, August 26th. I'm Jonathan Lemire, alongside U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC News, Caddy Kay. We're in this morning for Joe, Mika, and Willie. And Caddy, to James Carville's point there, we saw both in 2016 and 2020, there were voters who the polls simply didn't pick up who voted for Donald Trump, whether they were ashamed to admit they were going to vote for him.
The secret Trump voters.
Right, or whether just voters that have never talked to pollsters before, who are off the grid. Because the Trump campaign has had success bringing out first-time voters, which is about the hardest thing to do in politics. And I think we heard that last week in Chicago, which was, of course, a triumphant event for Democrats. That we just don't need to win. We need to win big to outperform the polls, but also put up a margin. So therefore, Donald Trump can't contest it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Speaking to some even conservative Republicans who have said to me, whatever the result is this election, I just hope it's super decisive so that we don't end up with a period afterwards where we're all in litigation and the country is in uproar because we don't have a clear result. I've had some strategists say to me, we actually need to win by 5 to compensate for that low polling factor on the Trump side. I just think with the history of polls in 2016 and the history of polls in 2020, I gave up. I went into kind of poll AA after 2016 and said, that's it, I've sworn off polls forever. Of course, now what do? I look at all of the polls. But we all do, and yet we all know that they failed us in 2016 and 2020 for various reasons. So I think, as James Carville is suggesting, we can't come out of that boom high of the Democratic convention where they were all united and excited, thinking, OK, that's it. You know, they've nailed it, because it's clearly going to be a very tight race for them.
So the president of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, Reverend Al Sharpton, is with us. And Rev, let's get you in on this idea of both flaws with the polls and the idea that Democrats, no one's saying they're overconfident, but certainly came out of last week feeling really, really good. There's a lot of work ahead, and they got to put up some substantial margins, considering also the inherent advantages Republicans have in the Electoral College.
No doubt about it. I think last week was tremendous in terms of being a flawless convention.
Including, of course, the Reverend's own speech.
It certainly was.
Thank you. But that does not mean that you win 70-some-odd days later. And we have to look at the fact that Donald Trump has a very loyal, solid base. We do not know what he intends to do in the next 5 or 6 weeks. There's always the October surprise, they say. So I think that it is to his advantage to play underdog. And I think it is the vice president, Kamala Harris's advantage, to say to her people, fine, all of my supporters, we had a great convention. Now, this does not mean we win. She must fight like she's 20 points below, because you don't know with this man. This man's not only fighting for an election, he's fighting for his life. He's facing a sentencing September 18th on criminal charges, 34 felonies, and he's facing 3 other trials. So he feels if he loses, they're going to run the gamut on him legally, both financially with the New York State Attorney General's case and with criminal cases. So you're facing a presidential race you've never faced in American history, a man that has to win, possibly to stay out of jail, at least be able to settle a lot of his legal problems.
And even if that Georgia case is fundamentally perhaps doomed, the 2 federal cases would come back were Trump to lose this November. And I think you make a good point. I think in virtually every speech that the vice president has given since she took the top ticket, she's used the word underdog because she knows it's about motivation and trying to be also the change candidate, the challenger, which is not easy to do when you're part of the
and
White
what we
House.
don't know about this election is whether it's going to be about trying to win over some persuadables, or whether, which was my sense from both the Democratic and the Republican conventions, both sides are really seeing this as a turnout of their base election. That if you can push your base to turn out, that is where you're going to get the numbers. Now, obviously, you'd love to win over some persuadables. There are just so few persuadables to be had left in any of those swing states now. The focus has to be on getting your people to the polls.
4, 5%, 6%
Yeah,
maybe
tiny.
at most. And indeed, that enthusiasm surrounding the Harris campaign following the DNC is making Republicans increasingly nervous. The Hill spoke with a Senate Republican who said this: in some of the swing states, people are becoming increasingly concerned that the momentum is moving in the wrong direction. They're beginning to realize this is a wrestling match. There's not going to be any knockout punch, and they've got to get the best grip they can find, and it's all state specific. Adding, this is sort of when you have to slap the panicked first person in the foxhole and get them to focus again, the senator said. It comes as Donald Trump, meanwhile, is struggling to stay in the spotlight. The former president did hold events to counter-program the 4-day convention last week, but his speeches did little to steal coverage away from the vice president and the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he got the coverage and the attention when he was saying the stuff that was not about policy, which is exactly what his campaign
had asked him not to do.
Not to do. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign has raised an eye-popping $540 million since the VP took over the top of the ticket. The campaign says it reached the $500 million mark just before Vice President Harris's acceptance speech Thursday night. It then raised another $40 million after that speech. NBC News cannot independently verify those numbers until the next round of Federal Election Commission data becomes available to the public. A third of that cash came from first-time donors, including a notable amount of young people and women. Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz are hitting the trail with a bus tour of Georgia beginning on Wednesday. It'll be the duo's first time campaigning together in the state, while the trip will be Harris's 7th visit to Georgia just this year. The vice president will end the tour on Thursday with a solo campaign rally in Savannah that night. The Harris campaign is also organizing multiple fundraisers for the Democratic ticket in the coming weeks. Events are likely in New York, California, Georgia and Florida, according to 2 sources familiar with the planning. I mean, clearly they've come out of this and said, right, we have to hit the ground running. We have no time to lose.
Yeah, it was always a surprise, actually, that she was off the trail for a couple of days after the convention. But some of that is, I'm told, it's debate prep, because that debate is just around the horizon.
Or maybe it's not.
Well, we'll see. We'll get into that in just a moment. So that was the vice president's schedule for the week. Here's what Trump is doing. He's going to be barnstorming. He and his campaign are barnstorming the Midwest this week. The former president will be in Michigan later today, while Senator J.D. Vance will be in the Great Lakes state on Tuesday. Trump will head back to Michigan on Thursday before heading to Wisconsin that night. The former president will end the week with a trip to Pennsylvania on Friday. But, as Caddy just hinted, Trump is suggesting that he may back out of next month's debate with the vice president. In a Truth Social post late last night, Trump railed against ABC News, which is the host of the September 10th debate in Philadelphia, accusing the network of being biased against him. He wrote this: "Why would I do the debate against Kamala Harris on that network?" Adding, "They've got a lot of questions to answer. Stay tuned.
It's the stay tuned, isn't it?
It's one of his go-tos.
It's like,
Let's
The
stay
Apprentice
tuned.
all over again.
Yeah, building the
Next
suspense.
week.
Next week, we'll see if we debate. So in May, of course, let's remember, Trump agreed to 2 debates with an unspecified Democratic opponent. There's no name listed there. But that was when President Joe Biden, of course, was still the party's presumptive nominee. So let's bring into the conversation here columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius, as well as NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale, who just saw on Way Too Early. So, David, let's get your take to start with this suggestion from the former president that, well, maybe I won't do that debate after all. There's been a lot of chatter in Trump world that he is not eager to square off with the vice president. We know that he sometimes has trouble with taking questions from women, from powerful women. We've seen that throughout his political career. But she's not just a powerful woman. She's a prosecutor. And the idea of a prosecutor versus a convicted felon seems to be one that he's not particularly excited about.
So I think what we've seen in the days before the convention and certainly after is that Trump just doesn't know how to deal with Kamala Harris. He doesn't know how to pigeonhole her. His usual language of belittlement, derision isn't working. There is in the country this sense, I think, of we've been relieved from an election that people were dreading between 2 candidates who've run before, an acrimonious, nasty convention, a sense of the country locked with these 2 older Americans, and then suddenly there was a convention that really was a joyous event and that said, we've turned a page, and Trump can't figure out how to turn his own page. I think as he plans for the debate, he has to appreciate that she is charismatic and charming on television in a way that he fancies he is. That the camera loves Kamala Harris. She's learned in the cadence of her speeches, the way she presents herself, to be a formidable TV presence. Donald Trump knows TV. He's smart enough to know he's got a problem here. He hasn't figured it out.